Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Anthony Joshua, the former unified champion who's on his way back in a rebuild, says he wants to be out again in about 12 weeks. So Joshua, posting to his social media, will go through this and then on to, well, what does an opponent look like? What's realistic? Because let's face it, Anthony Joshua fighting Tyson Fury next, yeah, that doesn't fill me with confidence that that's going to happen, given the past sort of negotiation stalemates that have been reached. And I think realistically, Tyson Fury will want Anthony Joshua to have a good win, so then it gets people believing that he's in with a shot against Fury, and then it generates more interest and more money. That's how all that works. But Joshua's post on social media, he says, just me and my mate Abs. And he's got some words down the bottom there saying light 12 rounds, and that's speaking of the Franklin fight. Let's face it, that's a little disrespectful to Franklin, but also a little disrespectful for to the fans, because you could argue there was rather light action in that fight. Joshua not really wanting to commit fully, a little bit tentative, and he could have done better. But it was his first win in 2 years, so it is what it is. He says, cardio tick, recovery day tick, 12 weeks, I go again, tick, all glory to God. So 12 weeks, what does that look like? Well, you'd basically have to have the opponent close to being locked in now. Certainly you'd need to be getting the venue and other things all organised. But the first name that we'll cover is Otto Valen, and he's been calling out Anthony Joshua relentlessly in the past year or two. And after the win he had over Franklin, Valene said, please let me get my hands on Joshua. Joshua is not the same guy anymore. His head is gone, and the stuff after the fight shows it even more. He's feeling too much pressure. And he did remark during the fight that Joshua was winning the fight, but Jermaine is hanging in there. Bearing in mind, Valene and Franklin are part of the same stable. They are both promoted by Dimitri Salita. Otto Valen was a name that was heavily talked about before Jermaine Franklin came in and eventually got the fight. Remembering they took Franklin off a loss after Franklin had lost to Dillon White. But the thing is, with Otto Valen saying, let me get my hands on Joshua, he's not the same fighter. I'm not sure Otto Valen is the same fighter. Very inactive, not great opposition in recent years, and when he has fought against Kamil Sokolowski, and there was a more recent fight, I can't even remember the name of the opponent off the top of my head, but it was in the Boston area, and it was in a hall, he looked pretty pedestrian. I actually think, against popular opinion, that Anthony Joshua knocks out Otto Valen. I don't actually think that's nearly as competitive as some people are making it, based off Valene's performance against Fury, 4 years ago now, and he's rotted on the vine since, trying to cash in on that opportunity that he had against Fury, just never really has, and he's looked pedestrian in recent fights. If that fight happens, I actually think he's probably going to lose to Joshua. Some people are going to disagree with that and say, well, maybe Valene will step up to the occasion. He hasn't been up for some of these opponents. But also remembering, Otto Valen, not a big puncher. Otto Valen also does tire in fights. Otto Valen can be clipped. There's some of his recent fights have shown that, he's not invulnerable. He's not a guy that can just avoid everything. Sure, he can box and move well, but he can be clipped. Someone who might be a more realistic option potentially for Joshua, and also at one point ahead of this comeback fight, was an option, Dempsey McCain. He sort of raised up as a potential option. Maybe it was more sort of Matchroom at the time trying to build his name. But if Joshua is going to have another so-called tune-up or another confidence builder, especially because he didn't really look fantastic in the Franklin fight, Dempsey McCain is another name he could fight within the Matchroom stable. Sort of seems like eventually McCain could be on the Joshua radar, but it always sort of seemed like McCain was one win short, a decent win, of really putting himself in the conversation. But he's in the stable, and I'm sure he would snap Eddie Hearn's hand off to have Joshua in 3 months. I guess hopefully he's not on the eggs like Conor Benn was, apparently. Dillon White, he was at the fight. He was making no secret that he wants to fight Joshua. He wants that big payday. And to be honest, with White where he is at this stage of his career, I think White is washed. But then again, you can look at Joshua and go, well, he didn't look fantastic, but I do think Joshua would again stop Dillon White. That fight is always there if and when he wants it. Maybe Joshua will take one more fight before he faces Dillon White later in the year. So Dillon White's next move will ultimately, I think, be shaped in some way by what Anthony Joshua does next. And White will also snap off Eddie Hearn's hand to take that fight with Anthony Joshua. So there's a number of guys who are sort of doing a bit of a pick-me dance right now, wanting that work. And especially after seeing that performance against Jermaine Franklin, a number of heavyweights have been calling Joshua out. There'll be a whole bunch of guys lining up because they think Joshua's beatable, and it comes with a good payday. Michael Hunter was another that sort of said of a fight with Joshua, it'd be fun when someone mentioned it. I'm not sure he's really in the running. Jarrell Big Pharmacy Miller, he actually put out a little clip, and you can see it here running in the background, basically trash talking Anthony Joshua after the fight, all that sort of stuff. He missed his opportunity, probably unlikely to ever get it back, unless there was a situation they had to fight because it was ordered or something like that. I just can't see Eddie Hearn voluntarily making it. Sure, a bit of bad blood, but are they going to work with him again? How can you guarantee he's not cheating, because he's cheated multiple times? Joe Joyce, he said that he wants to face Anthony Joshua, and they actually, Queensbury, put a press release on the day of the fight out saying, if we both come through what I would love that fight in the summer, two of the best in the UK going at it. The winner fights Tyson Fury. And actually, that would be a pretty good path to a fight with Tyson Fury. And if Joshua beat Joyce, then everyone would be baying for the fight with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. I think at the moment, a lot of people look at that sort of fight. Joshua, even though he's a big puncher, they just go, well, Tyson Fury, based on what we've seen him recently, and Anthony Joshua, and we can only judge them on their recent performances, that there is a bit of a gap and that Fury should canter to a win in that one should they fight. But Joe Joyce is a terrible style matchup, I think, for Anthony Joshua. The juggernaut can eat punishment and then dish it out himself. And I think Anthony Joshua, we have to remember, he wasn't really made to fight that hard against Jermaine Franklin. 255 at the weigh-in was a massive red flag. And a guy who's going to try to deplete you is going to have a lot of success in draining your gas tank over rounds. So coming in at 255 would never work for a fight like Joe Joyce. We've just seen it with Joseph Parker against Joe Joyce. He came in at a very similar weight to that, and ultimately, after a couple of rounds, was blowing hard and didn't really sort of have much success in the fight in terms of putting a dent in Joe Joyce. But Joshua, bigger puncher than Parker, so he's always in there with a chance with his punching power. We've seen Joe Joyce also hurt to the body in the past against Bryant Jennings, but that would be a hard fight, I think, for Anthony Joshua should they take it. I do think they'll probably go for some sort of option, maybe like a Dempsey McCain, maybe an Otto Valen, remembering these guys were sort of top of the conversation for Joshua's comeback fight. I think after what they saw, and Derek James and co will probably like, okay, it's another camp, it's another opportunity to, embed some of my training style and different things, techniques with Joshua, and having another, they won't couch it as a confidence builder, but it would be a sub-world level fight. And I know some people rate Otto Valen highly and think that he's a top 10 sort of operator, but I don't believe he's there right now. He doesn't have the results or the wins to justify being in that conversation. Cutting Tyson Fury, but then ultimately losing and having a win against Dominic Breazeale since, I don't think that's a top 15 fighter, in my view. But, obviously, Otto Valen, boxing and moving, a southpaw. I mean, really, he does a poor man's version of Alexander Usyk. But I think Joshua, with the way that he's been sort of trained for southpaws, especially the best southpaw in the world in recent years, I think that's a much better style matchup than people think for Anthony Joshua, especially because Valene cannot punch like Franklin. Dempsey McCain, he's a knockout waiting to happen at some point. It just is what it is. And I think they're going to be wanting to Joshua to get back on the knockout train. Getting someone, laying them out unconscious, separating them from their senses, does something to fans. It helps paper over those cracks and get gets people believing. And the fact he didn't really, hurt Franklin all that much in that fight, didn't put him down. Franklin didn't look to the point where he's, ready to go. Sure, he was hurt a few times to the body, a couple of right hands backed him up, but he wasn't terribly hurt. And I think people were disappointed that Joshua couldn't put it on him, couldn't get him out of there like many people expected. They were looking for that statement and it never came. What do you think is likely next for Anthony Joshua? Are there some other names that you think are viable options at short notice? What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.